What's going on, everyone? Welcome to this week's episode of the Indy and Dots podcast. We're joined by a guest. Finally, after many weeks of months of waiting, we have got through to this guest in particular. I'm joking, please don't get upset. So our guest today is an award-winning spoken artist, educator and author. She's one of the UK's most critically acclaimed spoken word poets, and her work has been credited for tackling difficult subjects and helping raise awareness of serious social and political issues. Her debut book, Brown Girl Like Me, is set to release in February 2022. Her name is Jaspreet Kaur. Jaspreet, how are you?
Hi guys, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thank you for coming on. So, as I said, it's been a long time, but you've been one of the guests who've been wanting on for a very long time. Recommended by many, to say the least.
Thank you. Oh, that's so kind.
Indy asked me today on our call, Jas. He was like, how do you say that word? Is it Netra? Is it Netra?
Look, yeah, let's start.
Netra.
Okay.
Look,
Netra.
Punjabi isn't great, right? And I was like, maybe that's her surname.
No, good question. Yeah, what is Netra? I do get asked this question a lot. What is behind the Netra? Where did that come from? And it's now become like known and everything, but Netra is actually a Sanskrit word that I came across years ago. I've always been fascinated in linguistics and the etymology of where words come from and where they originate from, and obviously a lot of South Asian languages have derived from Sanskrit, so like looking at where words originally form. And I came across this one word, Netra, and it had thousands of different interpretations for this one word, and I was fascinated by it. But it means a multitude of different things, but it does mean, kind of relates to that saying of that our eyes are the window to our soul, or this idea of having a third eye. And I thought that was really beautiful, this idea of looking at what is behind the Netra, what is behind what the world sees on the outside, this kind of physical form that we have and we present, what is behind all of that, and really digging into what's behind the Netra. And then that is essentially what all my work was doing. That's what my poetry work does, that's what my writing work does, my educational work that I do is delving into who we are as deeper people, and unpacking that. So yeah, that's where Behind the Netra came from, and I've stuck with it since.
I'm sure that there's a BBC show called Behind Her Eyes or something.
There is, and you know when
that they ripped it off you, innit? Right? I knew it.
You'll be surprised how many people ended up messaging me saying, "Do you know there's a show on Netflix called was it Netflix on BBC?"
I think it's on one of the two, but yeah.
Yeah, Behind Her Eyes. It was a really good series.
Behind Her Eyes. There you go. See, I knew I wasn't making that up. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Completely wing that one. I'm not gonna lie. But one of the things you have done, Jaspreet, is you made Topknot Or Not, which is a big thing for the Asian community. So those of you that haven't watched it, please watch it. It's available on BBC iPlayer. And it's a pretty much, how do you describe it? A short skit maybe, of about 10 minutes long.
Monologue, I'd say.
Yeah, a 10-minute monologue of a Punjabi boy who has his hair basically, and he's growing it out. And it's about a difficult day that he had at school and the struggles he has within of wanting to keep his hair and wanting to cut it. And it hit pretty much every nail on the head that I felt at school as well growing up. And I think it might have resonated with Garan in the same way too. But we have very different schooling experiences, me and Garan. So yeah.
It means a lot hearing that from people that have had similar experiences or have decided to keep their gears or not, because that story is honestly a story that I know a lot of things have gone through, including my husband. And he was probably one of the people that inspired the story the most, because it is essentially his story. And even kind of the basis of what happens on that school day of someone calling that young boy's patka a handkerchief is actually something that happened to my husband. So before I wrote this script, obviously I didn't want to dive into it without having those conversations with people that have actually had these experiences. So speaking to my husband, my nephews who are all growing their gears and all have juris, my dad who wears the star. So speaking to family, friends, other friends that I have who are things that have kept their gears, and hearing about all their stories, because I wanted to tell this story as authentically as I could, but also being really sensitive with this topic because it is such a sensitive topic. And it wasn't about getting it right or wrong, because I don't necessarily think there is a right or wrong when it comes to storytelling. That is the point of storytelling. It's telling stories. There are multiple different stories. But I wanted to tell one that felt authentic and felt like it would resonate with the Sikh community and Sikhs who have gone through these experiences. So yeah, it means a lot to know that it resonated with you guys as well.
No, honestly, it did. It meant a lot to me because, well, me and Gaurav, we both went to different schools. So Gaurav went to a school where he was surrounded by a lot of minority folks. So not just Sikhs, but also Muslims, Hindus, etc. And the grammar school of his was more accepted than, say, the state school that I went to, which where I was one of like 4 Indian kids in the whole year. And I was asked questions like, what's that on your head? Is that a handkerchief, etc., all this kind of stuff. And you kind of just let it slide, but looking back on it, you're like, oh wait, that wasn't nice. Like all the stuff people were saying to you.
Did you actually wear a parka, or did you have like there are some people?
So I phased out of the jura in like year 7, 8. So during school, I think I had a jura, and then I think I changed to parka halfway through. Yeah.
No, jura is just a top knot. That's not. As in, did you have like a?
I think I just had that. Yeah, that with like a handkerchief, let's say, on top. I guess they call it, but yeah. That's it.
Okay. Yeah,
and it's interesting what you said there about like all those little comments that you would get, because that's what I was really trying to get across. That obviously when people watch the film, I don't want to give too much away, but when he's making that decision about his gears towards the end of the film, it isn't like there's this one day where you go through this radical decision of kind of keeping your gears or not. It's all these small microaggressions of like things that happen over time, a little comment here, a little comment there. It's not always a big dramatic event, which is sometimes how it's been conveyed on TV before. Like this big dramatic thing happens and then you go home and you're like deciding whether you want to keep it or not. And I wanted to convey that it's not always like that. It's these little microaggressions, these micro assaults that I describe microaggressions like paper cuts. It's like you get a little paper cut here, a little paper cut there, a little paper cut there. And over time, they hurt and it hurts. But at the time, you might not really realize what's going on, or you don't take it too seriously. You're just like, okay, that doesn't mean too much. But over time, it will impact how you feel about yourself, and it will impact some of the decisions you want to make. So that's one of the things I did want to get across, that it isn't always this one big dramatic event. It's sometimes these small drips of things that happen over time.
I was expecting that. Before I watched it, it was like, oh, it's going to be a shot where whatever's happened, maybe he's been a fight and his case is open, he's walking home and he's got his back on his hand. But actually, the story you told probably represents like a bigger portion of what people have, and it's the ongoing thing. And looking back at it now, if you don't have sangat, if you're not in a strong community, if you don't have your mom and dad telling you sakhiyan about, Guru Sahibs and case and Pai Mati Das and all these things, then actually it's hard. It is hard. And that's where I think Indy and I had slightly different kind of experiences, where actually I was around people who never disrespected my case or my parka. I never felt like I was outsider. But then the other thing, Indy, was I went to India a lot. Like I used to go every year, man.
No, you did, for sure. I only went probably about 2-3 times in my whole life. I think 3 times, twice to Punjab, that's it. And that once was when I was very young, and once was like 4 years ago. So very different experiences. And with that going, you're talking about Sikhi role models. I'm talking about just role models around me, like my brother and my dad. I saw that they kept their hair and they were older than me. So anything that I sort of had an issue with, I'd tell my brother, and my brother would say, just tell me, I'll beat him up. I was like, it doesn't really work like that. You're kind of in university and I'm going through this right now. But then, it's... The other thing I was told as well is if anyone touches your jura, you're allowed to do whatever you want. You can fight back, you can kick, you can scream, you can punch, you can bite. I was like, oh, really? That's like code red. So if anyone touches it, it's game over. You can do what you need to now. And then at the end of the day, mum and dad said, if anything happens, we will back you up in the headmaster's office because it's a religious thing and they shouldn't touch it. I was like, right, that's good to know. It didn't come to that, but it's good to know that if that happened.
Yeah, but knowing what your rights are and knowing what's acceptable and not acceptable is so important, that we are teaching that to young people. And also what you're saying about role models as well, about whether it's role models or just having sangat around you that it can support you through all of this makes a big difference, because going through these struggles alone is hard. And there are kids that are going through this alone. There maybe young kids that don't necessarily have people in their family who've perhaps kept their gears or have a sounding board. So I'm glad we're now starting to have these conversations, and there are these wider networks out there and different Sikh organizations out there doing what they can for young people to know that they're not alone in this, that there is support out there, and if they are struggling, to find the help and find some support.
There are parents out there now that are kind of going in different directions, and they're saying because they had it so hard growing up, they don't want their kids to keep their hair because they don't want them to go through the same adversities. And I think it was one of my family members asked me, how was it for me growing up? And I said I was okay-ish to a point. I still had comments and like issues, but I think society nowadays, it depends on where you are, doesn't it? I initially said to them, it's not as bad nowadays, but it really depends on where you're from. So if you're from a really poor area that people don't have any sort of education behind it, you're gonna be met with more adversity than say if you're in a posher area where the comments are a lot more subtle and you wouldn't really feel it when you're younger, but you might understand it when you're older and look back on it and think, oh shit, actually I was being given the same type of abuse but in a much more subtle, sugar-coated way.
Or it could, not maybe so much, I think, whether it's a working class area or a middle upper class area. I think it's more about how much of that demographic is actually there as well. Because in London, we'll see a certain demographic and maybe it is a little bit more accepting because it is a more diverse city. But as soon as you go outside London, and if you're only one Sikh family in that entire town, whether they're posh or not, maybe a difficult place to be in. You're going to stand out. So it's also involving those people as well. So being quite careful that we're not being too city focused and London centric or Midlands focused, where there is a lot of Sangat in those places. Also reaching out to these other communities where we do have Sikhs in maybe more isolated areas, that they don't feel too alone either, because that's where we have been seeing some of these more violent instances happening. It is in areas that are outside of the cities and outside of the more diverse areas.
Go on, I know you want to say something.
I've forgotten now. but this is all good stuff, and I think creating awareness is very important. The sounding board thing I think is really important. I think I was listening to Jordan Peterson this morning, and he just said that his statement was, we are not good at thinking. He said humans are not good at thinking, but we're good at talking. Right, and he was just essentially describing the premise of counselling. He was just saying the reason why people enjoy that or get value from it is that essentially you're unclogging and getting clarity on your thoughts. Which if you try and do yourself, it's too hard to be objective. And again, now you put it in the context of being 9-10 years old, you're trying to fit into a peer group, you're trying to find your identity. Maybe you just want to, have a clean header of the ball. I remember trying to play football with my tutor and then trying to header the ball and being like, and then they're like, oh no, you need to like header it here and not on your matha. And I used to play rugby, right? Every time you play rugby, a patka comes off. Then it was like swimming, and then they were like, oh, you can't put a swimming cap on, you have to get special permission from the headmaster. I was like, why? I was like, come on, man, have you seen how long my hair is? So all these things are there. But again, if I had it again, like if you're going to learn from these things, you're going to learn how to manage and deal with people. And as a kind of other thing is you become more educated about your faith and the ability to then convey that with other people. Like now, there's been a big movement, I'd say last 15 years about the Sikh contribution in terms of the world wars, right? And there's a lot of people about, look, our faith is around protecting other faiths, it's about doing seva. And it's a well-known fact about how many lives are lost in the First and Second World War, and a lot of people will rally around that this is a warrior faith. And I would hope that all young boys, that they have, they're proud of their history and what we are. At the same time, I think the other side is not to be critical of people who maybe choose to cut their gears, because I think again I went through a phase where I didn't voice this, but internally, if there were people close to me, like friends who I saw doing it, I'd be like, why are you doing it? And I'd become very judgmental in my head.
I did the same thing when I was younger.
And now it's like, no, like everyone's on their own path. And you just have to respect.
You understand that when you're older.
You do, and that's you should get wiser as you're older. It doesn't always happen.
No.
But these are things you reflect on. And the other thing, actually, I remember an instance when you were talking about touching your podcast. My best friend from school, we talk about this often. He once threw a football like threw it just at my head. I don't think he was intentionally trying to hit me in the head, but hit me in the patka, right?
Oh, right.
And patka was fine, didn't come off or anything. And I walked off really stroppy. And remember, he's my best friend. And after a while, I cooled off, and he'd apologized and everything. And then I remember I think it was at a Gataka class. This is some years on, and somebody was talking to me, someone much more learned than me, and he was saying that with any action in life, you have to look at what is the intention behind actions. And so when I look at it in that context of what's the intention here, to disrespect my Sikhi? What's the intention here to knock off my Parka? The answer was no in both of these things. And so to just blindly become angry before understanding that, again, this comes with increasing age. It's like these are the conversations to have, with young boys. But the awareness that's created from such a film is, it's phenomenal. The actor was brilliant. Yeah, I was watching. I was just smiling.
I really like that kid. Wow.
Yeah. I want to give a shout out to Sahib. He's an fellow East Londoner like me.
I did like how he kept his nuances of being from East London. Like he was saying words with slang. God. And I was like, yes, this is exactly it. It's not whitewashed. That's exactly how you talk. I like it.
And when I was writing the script for it and imagining, okay, what kind of kid is going to convey that character, Jag's character, I did want it to be someone from East London, and I did want it someone to have that swag, have that confidence, but also is going through all these challenges and is trying to figure it all out. And I wanted somebody who can convey that. So when we kind of set out the casting for auditions for the role, we actually had, which I want to give a shout out to all the boys that auditioned, we had 45 young Singhs come audition for this role. And we went through each of those audition tapes, and every single one of them blew me away. So it was so hard to choose who we were going to pick for this role, and we had to figure out somebody who was right in terms of kind of the age demographic and then the right kind of persona, and Sahib really fit the role perfectly, and that's why we decided to go with him. But even the other 44 boys, they were incredible, and it just showed us that there is so much talent coming through in our community, and specifically in these industries as well. We're talking about the arts industry, so we're talking about kids who want to go into acting, directing, filmmaking. So maybe not all of them want to become actors, but a lot of them want to go into the film or entertainment industry. And I was just over the moon to see that, because obviously growing up, we know that our parents were encouraging us to get into medicine,
everything,
accountancy, become an accountant, become a dentist, become a lawyer. And I had a lot of that too. Obviously, when I decided to go study history and then gender studies, my family were a little bit like, what is this? What are you going to go do? Are you
confused about your gender? Like, that's the main one.
This is a conversation we're not ready for yet, Jaspreet. Okay.
The conversation about gender studies was interesting, but we'll save that for a bit. But to see that we're now having more young people that want to get into these industries is incredible, because we do need people from our community there. We do need diversity in all of these industries, because the point is, it's not just so much about having us there and having a face there, but it's also about the storytelling side of it. Because if there wasn't me writing this script, and it was perhaps Flunna or ex-white male, he could have conveyed that story very differently. So this is why it's important we get our voices heard, so that we can be in control of how our identity is conveyed and can be in control of that narrative of how our story is told. And that is only going to happen if we try and get into these industries and try and get our voice heard. So shout out to all those boys that auditioned for that role, and all their parents who were behind the camera, like, do it again. Say it louder. Say it louder. And you can hear the mums and dads.
Cheer them on again.
Do it properly. Let me say it to you. Then give me the reaction. Yeah,
you can hear the mums and dads like behind the camera.
No, good. It's good to see parents cheerleading in that way.
Yeah. No, that was amazing.
Just to take a step back into the bit about judging people, Karan. There was a kid that I went to school with. A few of our friends know him. Well, I'll tell you his name after. But he went to the same school as me. He cut his hair when he was in year 6, and now he's at Amritdhari Singh. So he went from keeping his hair to cutting it to now going for Amritdhari, and I'm just like, I'd love to understand his journey as to why he went down that route and what made him pivot and come back. Maybe it was influences of like people, maybe it's his partner, etc. But all those little, as you said, microaggressions that maybe pushed him into, not push him away, but bring him back maybe. Who knows? Some people say it's your Gizmeth or whatever it is. Like you maybe have to go through that to realize who you are later on. But I didn't like how when I was younger, I thought, why'd he cut his hair? He's an idiot. I'm keeping my hair. But I was only young. I didn't understand that. But now if I talk to him, I can understand why he did it and where it came from. So that's helpful.
Yeah, this is the thing. The older you get, I like how you talk about the Netra and the third eye, and a lot of what I focus on in my coaching, Jaspreet, is about this thing. It's we focus on all of this, all the time. Oki karda, nindya, jugali, all this continuously. And it's like you start the journey of looking inwards and start discovering yourself. You could spend your whole life. People ask, I have other people, other faiths who ask, what is Sikhi about? And it's like, Sikhi is the discovery of self. You spend your whole life understanding who you really are, where you come from. You won't have time for all these other things. So you're absolutely right, Indy. I agree with you there.
On a side topic as well, Singhs are actually losing their hair now. So instead of actually cutting it, it's just falling out the older we get. So
bro, that's a male thing, man. It's not
no, it's a male thing. But I was like, okay, this is like, maybe there's another face to this where like you cut your hair when you're younger, fine. When you're older, you lose your hair anyway. And I'm just thinking, I thought, am I the only Singh out there that feels this way? Loads of others do. And I said, do you guys have issues with taking hair supplements or potentially doing what I do, which is not wearing a bug that often, but allowing your hair to breathe, having it loose, so that way you don't lose it? And I actually got slighted by a few people that I know for actually doing this and not wearing a bug. They're like, where's your bug? I'm like, I'm doing this so I don't lose my hair. And they're like, well, why are you being vain? I'm like, I'm not being vain. I'm trying to stop my hair falling out. Isn't the purpose of sticky to keep your hair? And I was like, it depends on how you interpret it. In which way. I get it's a representation thing, it's a respect thing. I know. But there is a balance there that I was thinking like, okay, why am I being pushed out now for trying to save my hair? Oh. Say that again?
Wait. You went a bit fuzzy there.
I'm saying, why am I being pushed out for trying to keep my hair?
Let me come back on a question there, though, because the question to you is actually quite good. What's the intention of trying to keep your hair? Because that's, as in, when I say trying to keep your hair, as in like keep it, not cut it or let it fall out. What's the intention then? Because you want
just to stop it from falling out, because I was getting clumps of hair for falling out, and it was getting quite upsetting, really. Understanding that for years I kept my hair, and then slowly it started coming out in bits where like I had spots in my forehead. I was like, I don't like this. It's actually messing with my own confidence as a thing.
Yeah, okay. So isn't that the point they're getting at there? Isn't it vanity then? You don't want to be bold, basically.
It's not vanity. It's confidence, and it's also how I feel within myself.
Yeah. So
but it doesn't mean that I'm disrespecting Sikhi any more by doing this.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
I think exactly what you're doing right now of asking yourself these questions.
That's the point.
Is the journey, and that's the point that. Asking yourself these things of your relationship with this, or understanding how you're feeling about this is the whole point. So I don't think there is no right and wrong. There is no black and white with these situations. I think what you're doing right now of asking yourself about why you feel these certain ways or where these feelings might be coming from is really valid. And I think that's the really important part. And figuring out what is right for you, because as we've said before, every single person's journey is going to be completely different. And everyone's connection with their gears is completely different. So keep asking yourself those questions and keep figuring it out, I think.
Of course. Just to slightly move on a little bit, how did you make inroads into getting that opportunity to writing this script for the BBC? And how did you get it on there?
Yeah, so that opportunity was a long time coming, to be honest. The conversations of having this film was going on for about 2-3 years, of having this kind of story about a Sikh boy or a Sikh-based story was something I was involved in for a while, and it was kind of going back and forth with the production company and other production houses and the BBC and CBBC. This was kind of going on for quite a while until the right opportunity came up, which was this series of short films that were going to be telling kind of very different stories from what we originally would have seen on CBBC. So the short that this particular film was a part of was a series of about 5-6 other films. So yeah, it was a long time coming, and this goes for everything within the writing industry that I've been working on, whether it is this short film or even the publishing industry and trying to get my book published. All of these things took a lot of time. And it was a lot of trying to figure out how these industries work, because obviously I didn't know anybody who wrote films. I didn't have anyone in my family who was a writer or an author or any of these things. So I was starting from scratch. So me and my husband Indy spent a good couple of years of really researching these industries and trying to get as much knowledge of how they work, because we didn't have that cultural capital, and that's what it's called, to have that cultural capital of knowing how these things work, or knowing so and so who can get you a job here, or get you on the top of a publisher's desk. I didn't have those networks or had those connections, so I was starting from scratch and had to do that groundwork of understanding how it all worked. And then I was like, okay, so these are the different avenues, these are the ways that we can approach it. But for this particular film, it was me doing the work that I was doing, sharing a lot of my content online, being quite vocal about the things that I was passionate about. And this particular production company had seen a lot of the stuff that I was doing prior to this, and approached me for this particular film. And they said, would you like to write the script on this? And when they said what the theme would be, I was like, yes, I would love to write it. Let me write it. And I did say from the start, I want to have as much of my own creative control over this story as possible. Like I don't want to be too conscripted on how it has to end and what has to happen. Please let me have the creative direction. And they said yes, and the production company was amazing. Everybody on that team was incredible. So it was a long time coming, but now that I'm understanding this industry more, it's now championing other people to get into it too, and trying to bring in more talent in any way that I can as well.
When you say you try to understand how these industries work, how do they work? Just give us a brief
How do they work?
Yeah, how do they work? Because none of us know.
Just
give me an elevator pitch of how it works, right? Go.
Quick masterclass. Let's talk about publishing, because that's one that I can tell you a bit more clearly about how it works. Okay, so if you want to get a book published, for example, you've got a book, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, a novel, something you've been researching, and you've got this idea for a book. You've maybe already written it, or you've started writing it. Okay, so there's different ways you could get it published. You can go down the self-publishing route, and there's different avenues to do that. You can do that through Amazon. There's a few other places that now kind of help with self-publishing. And that's great if you've got everything ready and you want to be quick about it, you want to get it out there, and you're ready to go. However, the cons of that is then you've got to do all the marketing yourself. You've got to push that book as much as possible yourself. If you've got a big kind of audience already, then maybe you can do that, because people are going to buy the book and read it. So that could be an option. Then there's kind of the crowdfunding side to publishing, which I've also been involved in with the Seek Colouring book with Colouring Culture, which came out last year, which was one of the first Seek Colouring books for adults.
I should get that for my degree. Yeah, I should. Yeah.
This might help with your colouring and staying
Karen.
in the line.
You can give me that for my 30th birthday as a present. Yeah, there you go.
Do it. It's beautiful.
When you lose all your hair.
That's what you can do. Just sit there colouring. It supports your mental health. So
thank you.
Definitely get it. So that was actually a crowdfunded campaign to obviously get this book made and created. We had a number of different Sikh artists involved in creating that colouring book. Again, amazing talent in the arts sector, for different illustrators and painters had put together this book. So that was crowdfunded, and that was the community, the Sangat, putting money in to make sure this book could be produced and then sent out and sold. Then there's the traditional route. So if you want to get into a traditional publishing house, so Penguin, Bonnier, Pan Macmillan, and there's lots of others. To do that, you actually need a literary agent. So just like you would have an agent if you're an actor to get you into movies, you would have a literary agent who supports you in getting your book taken up by a publisher.
No way. I wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah, so you can approach a publisher yourself. You can be like, okay, I've got this book idea. Do you want it? But the only concern there, and sometimes the danger there, is that there's no one who's going to have your back. The publishers could mess you around. There's lots of things involved in publishing, like the royalties and making sure you get the right cut, making sure everything's in the contracts the way that they should be. Obviously, if you're a first-time author, you don't know what should be in those contracts or not. So having an agent, having a good literary agent who's going to look out for all those things for you, has the expertise on those things, is the best place to start. And there's lots of different literary agencies across the UK, across the world. So you literally start emailing all of them, and you go to their websites. You can go to any literary agency's website and you'll find the different agents that they have, and you'll find which books that they're interested in. So if you do crime thrillers, you'd find the guy that can help you with crime thrillers. If you're writing feminist nonfiction, you'd find the agent who can support you with that. And then hopefully the agent says yes, they'll represent you. And then they will help you finesse a proposal, a pitch, right, to send to publishers. And this is basically any kind of pitch deck in any industry that you work
slides,
in.
All that stuff.
Slides, all that stuff. Basically conveying who you are, what is this book about, and why does it need to be released? Why does it need to exist? And why does it need to come out now? And you kind of put all that all together. If you've got an audience already, that's great. But if you don't, that's okay too. And you put that all together with your agent and you send that out to publishers, and you think about which publishers you're going to approach, because some of them may not be into that. So you've got into the theme that you're writing about, or the book that you're writing about. So thinking about which publishers you want to approach, and then you send it out to them. And then it's a bit of the waiting game. Then it's seeing whether any of those publishers want to pick it up or not. So that's the kind of 3 different routes that I researched. I looked into crowdfunding, I looked into self-publishing, I looked into the traditional route. And I personally felt like the book that I've written, Brown Girl Like Me, I just really felt like it deserved to be in a big publishing house. And obviously the benefits of that is that it's going to get into shops, it's going to get into bookstores across the UK, across the world. They will support you with the marketing and the publicity. You get an editor who helps you really finesse that book to the best that it can be. And I just felt like this book really deserved that, and I really wanted to push for that. So yeah, that's a quick masterclass on how to get published.
That was pretty good. I can't lie, that was pretty good.
It's gonna be a good snippet, Indy.
Yeah. It took you how long to write your book then? When did you start writing it? Did you have intentions of putting it out regardless of what happened?
Sorry, say that again?
Did you have intentions of putting it out regardless of what happened?
Yeah, I think if it didn't get picked up by a publishing house, and once I tried that quite a few times, if it didn't work, I would have self-published it or perhaps crowdfunded for this book, because I knew it needed to get out there some way, shape or form. And my plan B was then to self-publish. And I was like, if it gets to that, then fine, I'm going to put in all that effort to market the hell out of it, and make sure it gets everywhere it can. So that was my plan B. And I may take that option for other stuff later on down the road, who knows? But yeah. But this book was, to be honest, it was 7 years in the making. So wow. I first thought of the idea for this book when I was doing my master's in gender studies. And that's when I first thought of the concept for this book, because I grew up wanting a book like this to exist, a book for brown women on how to navigate what it's like for us navigating this intersectional identity all the time. And I remember growing up always feeling like I wish there was like a guidebook on how to deal with all the things that we as brown women go through, but that book never existed. And when I was looking for brown female representation in books and literature, but also in TV, on mainstream TV, I just couldn't see that representation anywhere.
This is way before Rupi Kaur was putting her stuff out as well.
Yeah.
Makes
so
sense.
When I then started to see there were then a few different names and faces coming out in recent years, Rupi Kaur being one of them in the poetry scene. But then we've also got like infamous names like the Goodness Gracious Me team and Mira Siao. So there were bits of representation growing up. You've got Bend It Like Beckham, Grinda Jedda's work and stuff like that. So we did see snippets of stuff, but there was never a book that kind of encompassed all of these things together. And I was like, how can this not exist? And when I started researching whether there were any non-fiction books on South Asian women, the last book to have been written was in 1978. And it was by a woman. Yeah. Over 40 years ago was the last non-fiction book about South Asian women in the UK.
I don't mean disrespect with this, but women could vote at that point, yeah? Because it sounds it sounds like it was made that long ago. Like, that's taking the piss. 40 years ago. So much has changed ever since then.
And it was by an amazing woman. Her name's Amrit Wilson, and it was called Finding Our Voice. And it was looking at South Asian women here in the UK. And obviously, at that point in the 70s, it was looking at a lot of the first wave, second wave migrants of women that were coming through during the kind of 60s and 70s. And Amrit basically went around the country and interviewed all these Asian women for this book. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to like update that, but also have a lot more weaved into a more recent book, kind of considering what it's like for us right now. So yeah, that's what inspired me to write the book. That was about 7 years ago when I first thought of the idea, and I was kind of penning it for years and I had the skeleton of the book thought out quite a few years ago about what chapters I wanted to write and how I wanted to research it. But it was about 2 years ago, so I'd say just before 2020, just before the world turned upside down, when I actually sat down and started really putting it together and writing it all down, and started the interview process as well. So I did a lot of interviewing for this book too. So yeah, it's been a long journey, but it's done.
See, in my head, I would have just thought, yeah, let's just make a book, put it out there, see if there's any feelers, and then that's it. It just gets published. But you don't think that there's interviews, there's a long process, there's agents. It sounds like acting, basically. In the way where you have to go through many processes to qualify yourself to even get the opportunity to write the book.
That's
or in your case,
it.
have it written but need it publishing.
And it works out differently for different people. I know some people who have written fiction, so written like an entire novel within maybe a few months, and then pitch it and it gets picked up. So there's no set route. Even J.K. Rowling got rejected by like 11 publishers.
The famous story.
Yeah, it's a famous story that everybody knows and every author ends up quoting, and I've ended up quoting.
How many people told you, like, if it doesn't matter, keep going, J.K. Rowling? Like, they must have said that to you so many times, and you're like, fuck me, man, I've heard this before. Like, leave it, please. It's not helping
get
me.
It published.
That's it. No, I get it. That's respectful.
But I do give that advice to everybody. If you really believe in that book, if you really believe in that story, keep pushing, keep trying, try different avenues. If something isn't working, shake it up and try something else. But don't give up, because
not many people know this, but Karan actually started to write a book, but he put it on hold for a little bit. So Karan, do you want to tell people about this?
Yes. So I started writing a book called Just Keep Failing. So a lot of the public speaking that I do, the stuff I do from stage, is around, initially it was around failing and changing the perception of failure, and this idea that, so, okay, I'm a doctor, fine, I had really good grades and all that kind of stuff, but the older I've gotten, it's the understanding that, good grades doesn't equal success in life. But when you're in school, and especially when you're brown Punjabi, like you said, there are certain things you aspire to, and there's this false, I call it the brown formula, this false narrative that, if you become one of these jobs, you have one of these jobs, that success, happiness, fulfillment is just going to come as a byproduct. And when I got to 23 and graduated as a doctor and felt really happy, by 25 I was disillusioned and thinking, so where are these other things? I'm supposed to be at the hill of, I'm there, like the rest of life should just be easy and happy, and it wasn't. But when I started writing the book, what I realized is when I was getting into it, I was trying to give a lot of value to people and to give them a framework and how to approach, the chaos of life. And it was while I was writing, I had a period of lots of chaos, which I hadn't, I hadn't thought it was going to happen. And like most chaos, it just kind of just happens. And that was a very bad period of anxiety. It's the first time I'd been through anxiety properly, and it crippled me to my knees, in Indy knows, but to the point where, I wasn't able to eat, I wasn't sleeping properly, 1 cup of coffee a day, my concentration was gone. And all these pursuits I had across many businesses, they were just on hold, I couldn't function. And it was at that point where, credit to my wife. So when I was going through it, see what she said to me, she was like, okay, each day you need to write, just write. And because one, it's going to, you're going to dump what's in your brain on this paper, but B, this stuff is going to be gold, because when you come out the other side and you're a phoenix rising from the ashes, you won't be able to remember how you felt when you were here. And actually I was looking at that stuff the other day, so it's quite a bit of stuff I've written, and had I not been through this chaos, it would it will obviously be part of the book now. And I kind of felt, if I'd written this book and got it out, it'd be a disservice, because people may read this book and think, his life is so easy, he just got good grades, he's a doctor, like it's easy for him to say you can be successful because of this, and this. And I was like, I really needed chaos. I really needed chaos in my own life, and to reflect on that. And now I have a deep appreciation of people with anxiety, which again, as a doctor prior to that, people would come in and you can sort of dummy empathize or sympathize, but you don't really know how somebody feels unless you've really been through it. Whereas now I think I can do that with patients, but B, where it's actually been more helpful is colleagues where you can see the signs and the symptoms. So during COVID, I've had a lot of because I do coaching anyway, I've approached a lot of colleagues about wanting to get into this kind of stuff. And the more you share your vulnerability, which I presume you'll have in your book as well, the more people just open up and they keep coming with their own vulnerabilities. And I just found that, okay, there is a way to help people now. And then obviously extension of that now will be, well, okay, so in the Punjabi Sikh community, where are we talking about this type of stuff? So I'm already thinking about kind of a lecture series, going across Gurdwaras and just talking about a couple of key things, depression being one of them, anxiety being one of them, suicide. I had a guy the other day, very good friend, Kaka, Time Turban.
Yeah.
He was at my house, he was just chilling out, and he told me about 3 or 4 different young Sikh guys who are, outwardly appeared good lives, happy, good jobs, and just, commit suicide. And we started talking, and we're like, where is this coming from? Like, how much anguish must there be that they thought this was the answer? So that's why I didn't put the book out. It was like, okay, I've written all this stuff, and it's like, you could probably find this stuff elsewhere. It's all very personal development type stuff about failing, and you need to get over failure. But I was like, no, but where's my story in this? This is just me regurgitating other stuff, which is why I paused. So I'm still writing it, but it's evolving.
So Karan, right now on this podcast, on this day, which is the 13th of October 2021, when are you going to put this book out? And when am I going to read it?
It's going to be released after I've left this world.
After you've left this world?
Yeah.
What? You're going to put it in your will? I leave Indy in my will the rights to my book.
The first copy.
The rights and royalties.
The first edition.
Yeah.
Signed. Give me the royalties,
He's not going to have long
Indian
left
Doctor.
anyway. You'll enjoy it for like a few months.
I'll set up a company, the Indian Doctor Company Limited, and then we can put it under there. You can just assign it to that, perfect. Sorted.
No, but you know what you said? You said 2 things that really stood out to me from what you just told us, was that firstly about chaos, and then how valuable chaos can be. And I've used that word before when I've described my journey with anxiety attacks and depression, because that's honestly how it felt. It felt like chaos in my mind, because it would be thoughts and feelings and fears just literally like wild horses, like running through my mind. And I remember when I first had an anxiety attack, I was only about 13, 14 when the first one happened, and I thought I was dying. I literally thought I was having a heart attack, because that's the only thing medically that I could relate it to. I was physically, my chest would tighten, my heart rate would increase, my breathing would increase, I would get like cold sweats, my hands, my fingertips would go numb. I've written a few poems about fingertips, because I remember whenever I'd have an anxiety attack, the following day I would still feel really numb in my hands and feel like I couldn't grip onto anything. So those lasting physical effects people don't realize either. So you have that panic attack, you have that anxiety attack, but it actually stays with you physically for another few days. It doesn't just disappear. And then obviously that's the physical feelings, and then the actual mental feelings are a lot worse. And it did feel like chaos, and writing was the only way I could get that chaos out and onto a page. And I say it was turning something chaotic into something beautiful, because when I would write it, it would turn into something beautiful. Even though they were ugly, horrible, dark thoughts, they did then feel beautiful when they were out on a page. So I really resonate with what you meant by chaos. And then you also said vulnerability, and that's a big part of the work that I do. That the point of sharing our stories and sharing that vulnerability is what builds connection and what builds empathy. And will spark change. Because, okay, all this talk about mental health stigma and tackling mental health stigma, by us sharing these stories is the only way we as a community are going to make any changes, and anything's going to shift. So yeah, please keep sharing your story, whether it's through your book or through speaking to other people.
We talk about it like in moments on the podcast. Like a lot of people don't know, but that's when me and Karan took our friendship to like another level, when he started telling me about it because I was feeling similar. And we spoke about it, but we didn't know we both felt that way until one of us told the other. And we're like, oh, you feel this way too? Oh, nice, man. So in the morning,
can I ask you both a question? Obviously, both you being men, did you have any of these conversations with other men before?
I think it's difficult to broach it with some guys because there's other guys that go through the same thing, but they don't tell you. So I'll tell mine, Karan, and you can tell yours. From my friendship circle, some of them they feel it, but they don't talk about it. And I feel like if I'm the first person to talk about it, that's great. Maybe they'll come talk to me afterwards. And that did happen a few times. So I was like, okay, that's cool. But then in my non-Punjabi friends, so I've got a couple of friends who are white, they've been open about it ever since the first time it happens to them. And I was like, oh. So one of my mates who came to my wedding, Jamie, he went off the radar after school. So I was talking to him about this at the wedding. I said, Jamie, you disappeared for like a year. And I said, I genuinely thought that I was never going to talk to you again. Because, you leave school, you meet new people, you move on. Yeah. And I said, I didn't know that you were going through all that stuff with your mental health and stuff. But you told me about a year later what had happened and why you disappeared. And I was like, imagine if you didn't tell me, you just disappeared and you wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be close anymore. And I said, you telling me that means a lot because you were only 19 and you told me that at a really young age. And that's very mature of you. And it's taken me and Karan, only happened how many years ago, Karan? Like a year or two ago? And for us to really be vocal and open about it, that's like a massive gap between 19 and 28, 29. So yeah.
And obviously you may know the answer to this, but why? Why do you think guys in our community don't talk about these things?
Karan, what's your experiences first?
Yeah, so at the time, I think so. It's probably Dino, who you know, Indy. So Dino is my coach. So he's
been on the podcast before, guys.
Yep, he has been on the podcast before, and it's interesting now because actually we were together a few weeks ago. He's down south, and we were looking at some of the WhatsApp messages at that time. And that's the beautiful thing I like about WhatsApp because it's actually documented the level of conversation.
Yeah.
There's a great thing that Jordan Peterson talks about where he talks about, when life is good, you can plan a couple of years ahead and blah, 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 holiday here, blah, blah, blah. He goes, when shit hits the fan, real chaos happens, reduce your time frames. What am I doing in the next 5 minutes? That kind of time frame. And there's one message between me and Dino. At the end of the message, we were checking in daily, and I literally sent a message which said, have eaten a Snickers bar today, have been on a walk, have done Japji Sahib Nera Sahib the part. And literally...
Very basic shit. Yeah.
Right, and he was like, you have succeeded the day. Like, it was literally at that level that we were rebuilding from. Yeah. So he was probably the person I spoke to, and I'll answer your question, Indy, you can answer after that. Why do men in our community not open about it? Yeah, it definitely, I see this in hospital, but it's the stigma. It's a stigma of there's something wrong with me, and I'm alone. And I say this to all the rest of the doctors and nurses I work with all the time. I say, look, if we all sit in a room together, if we could just look at what we're all thinking about, you'd realize we have the same problems. Maslow's hierarchy of needs and things. Same shit, different narratives, but we're all experiencing the same stuff. And if we start speaking to each other, just the act of, like Indy said, when you share something and you just automatically start feeling better that, he understands. He's going through it as well. I'm going through it as well. We can do something together. You have to be, and the other, a lot of things I get now is when I do share this, and this is why I'm happy sharing this stuff. It's like, you've had it, like Jazz, you're so confident that you run a company, you do this, and you've had this. That's the kind of comments I get now, and I'm like, that's to show people. I had two quick medical stories. I had a CEO in A&E the other day. She's been super stressed for 3 years, and now it's manifesting in physical anxiety symptoms. And I was just thinking, wow, you've lasted 3 years before you've kind of blown out.
Fair play, man.
Do you know what I mean? And the second lady was a young nurse, right? A young Muslim nurse who worked in community, and she come in and I like, I read a history and I was like, this sounds pure anxiety. And I sat next to her and I said, come on, what's up? And all it came down to was she was living with her in-laws. Her father-in-law had passed away, and her husband felt that he had to stay with his mom, look after her. They had a house which they could have moved out to, but they were not doing that because he felt he had a duty to his mom. But what was happening is when she go to work, her mother-in-law was basically just doing all this to him and poisoning their relationship.
Oh shit!
And within 5 minutes, she was pouring out. Like, she was tearful, and I was basically just doing coaching with her, like, where do you want your life to be, and how can we get there, and da 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 da. And by the end, like, again, I haven't fixed anything here. The issue is still there, but she's been heard. She doesn't tell her husband about this. She doesn't express her feelings, her thoughts, and emotions. She doesn't feel like she has a right. And I was like, it's just so rife. And the thing I said to her at the end was, look, my experience through anxiety has taught me this, that it's not that some people have mental health disease and some people don't. Everybody is on the spectrum, and it just takes a few small spikes of this chaos to come, and you're off kilter. So this whole movement about how do we bicep curl for the brain, right? Is prevention is the best cure. Doctors say it all the time. So what are you doing day to day to preserve your mental health? This is where the work needs to be done. Don't wait till acute crisis to then be like with a psychiatrist or being sectioned and taking tablets and all these things.
Yeah, but no one tells you this in school, Karan.
Well, I know, but this is what I'm telling people. This is the journey, man. This is one of my things to champion.
Do not wait to crisis point.
Do not wait. Support. If you go to the gym to build your muscles so you don't get diabetes and heart disease.
People are paying £500 a month for their gym subscriptions.
£500 a month gym subscription. Yeah, tell me that one, man.
Mate, London gym.
Oh, London, that's the mad inflation.
I'm definitely not. But yeah, no, absolutely. Don't wait till crisis point to seek support. See your mental fitness in the same way you would see your physical fitness. And that's exactly what I'm trying to convey to people as well. So find what tools work for you. Of course, there's the professional services, whether that is looking for medical support or forms of therapy, but then there's other things that you could be doing on a daily basis that do support your mental fitness. So do not wait till crisis point. Do not wait till all of these signs, physical and mental, start coming through. Or
going back to the why we don't talk about it, or why we didn't talk about it. Was that your question originally?
Yeah.
10 minutes ago, but why didn't we talk about it? Because you're not sure who's to talk to about it. That's a guy. You can talk to girls about it because girls are a lot more open about it, and they have their own little girl chats, and you guys, I'm really stereotyping here, but you'll sit down, you'll have a little cry, and you'll tell each other stuff. Guys don't have that. We just have let's go for a meal. Let's talk shit about memories.
Mixed grill,
mixed grill.
Or it has to be through certain vices, and I've kind of seen that firsthand.
Yeah, so some guys drink,
open up,
and then they start opening up, and I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, if that's your lubricant, then fine, I understand. But
but
it shouldn't take for that to come out for you to be able to say how you truly feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why when I talk about being a feminist, when I talk about breaking down patriarchal structures and people are like, oh, here she goes on again, angry feminist. What I'm actually trying to say is that patriarchy kills us all. It kills women, but it also kills men equally.
When you say patriarchy, what do you mean?
So these patriarchy is structures that hierarchies that mean that men are above women for XYZ reasons. So that's kind of a quick summary of what patriarchy is. And just like you've got institutional structures of racism and racist structures, you also have of certain races being dominant than others. With patriarchy, it's different sexes being dominant over the others. But what I'm trying to show people is that those same things that hurt women do hurt men as well. So, for example, by forcing really strict gender constructs of, okay, girls are emotional and girls cry, but boys can't, and boys need to be stoic and strong. And these are things we're imprinting in our kids from the day that they're born about how they should behave. All of this terminology, all this language of what we're saying to boys and then saying something very different to our daughters, it might not make an impact straight away. You might not see anything straight away. And this is what I've seen firsthand from the men in my life, that it's fine when they're younger and during their teenage years, they're okay, their mental health is doing all right, they're kicking back, school's fine, whatever. They go to uni, they're still all right. it seems to kick in the late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've seen patterns of this happening now, and that's the only reason why I'm flagging this, because I've seen it happen with so many guys that there's something here, there's something there about the fact that when they get to that age, for some reason they're really struggling. And I don't know if it's because at that point in life they've got lots of responsibilities going on, whether it's
it is that. It's the responsibility. You're growing up, you're meant to get married.
All the things that they've been taught about what it means to be a man, and that when they grow older, they're going to have these responsibilities, and they've got to be strong, and then they've got to take care of the house, and they've got to be the breadwinner, and they've got to, all these things that we're apparently telling men to be, then starts kicking in at that age. And then, of course, they may be struggling. They may be finding that time difficult. They may need some extra support. They may need a shoulder to cry on. But because we've been telling them for so long that they're not allowed to do that, we're then seeing men struggling, and we're even seeing men taking their own lives. And this is where I'm saying, why, isn't it? And then we wonder why are young sick men taking their own lives, and not just sick guys, but also men across the country. It's biggest killer of men under the age of 45 is suicide. Why are we letting this happen? So this is why when I'm saying, okay, let's deconstruct some of these problems with patriarchy and gender inequality, it's impacting women, it's killing women, but it's also hurting and killing men in certain ways too. So yeah, I'm really passionate about this because I've seen firsthand how it's hurting the men in my life as well, and making sure that they're getting the support that they need, whether that's formal forms of therapy, whether that's just a shoulder to cry on, someone to talk to. And obviously there is so much I can do for the men in my life, but this is conversations that I'm really glad you guys are having as well amongst men in those spaces, in spaces that are just for men as well, that these conversations are happening. And it shouldn't take leaning on a vice like alcohol, especially in our community that has a really rife problem with that anyway, of alcoholism. That we shouldn't be leaning on these things, because there is, then if we look at other issues within our community as well, and this is kind of big topics like trauma and intergenerational trauma of things that our parents and our grandparents,
it gets passed down step by step. So say if you see your dad, who's first generation, who came over, who came to England, didn't know anyone, didn't know how anything worked, couldn't speak the language, had to get a job, had to figure it out. No wonder he fucking turned to alcohol to help him sleep, or to deal with everything and to build a sense of community, because it helps them just get a grip on everything. It helps them calm and chill. And you can see why they touch drinking so heavily. And then you can see why later in life they just carry it on, because they're like, oh, that's what I need now to fix myself. And then the younger generation looks at their dad and says, oh, he does that, so I'll do the same. And it doesn't get fixed. The only point it gets fixed is when the generation beneath says, that's not right, why isn't that right, and start questioning it, and then starts digging into it.
So awareness, insight, and chaos. You need life's change agent are these things. And Indy, we talked about extensively about where do values come from. And we have these values which we imbue from our parents, which is, power observation. So, what do they think about what's a good life, and what do they think about money, and how do they value these things? So what we see, what we get taught, and what we just inherently are around.
But things that they value now and what we value now, it's a different world, so it can't be the same. So they value security, they value being secure, they value having a stable job, they value as going to work, coming back, being safe, honor, respect. We don't value that as much as we as much as they do. Our values are now like happiness, fulfillment. Like, that's much different compared to, say, what they had. They're like, what's happiness and fulfillment? Everything's fine.
If you go to Maslow's hierarchy, if your primary need is
survive.
Rent, exactly, survive. Because they were at that level. You can't, if you say to somebody who's homeless, like, mate, you need to focus on self-actualizing. Understand what you need to do. Like, that we are lucky and privileged that we're at that position. But at the same vein, here's the other problem. So we are paralyzed by all the this data around us now, and the problem with that now is, even though we've got more now than we've ever had, we can still feel so empty and lost, is because we don't know now what to focus on. And this is now becoming the problem. So like I had a young person come in today to hospital who there's such a rife level of entitlement. It's just like, she's like 19 years old, and she's like, book me an ambulance to go home.
What?
Yeah, like has no medical issues, like, you know, before anyone says like whatever. There was nothing like that. But there is such a sense of entitlement and privilege about this generation. It's like what you said, Jaspreet, earlier. It's about, instead of entitlement, our young generations need to focus on responsibility. If you increase responsibility, the things that we talk about, fulfillment, happiness, they will come. But it has to come from that. You have to seek out responsibility. What's happening here? Internet?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
What's wrong?
Yeah, no, it's fine. My thing's just gone off on it. Doesn't matter.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay.
Responsibility.
It is responsibility. I need to move on because I'm a bit aware of time, but that was really cool. That would be a great snippet. Last topic then, Jaspreet. You went to the same uni as I did. We never crossed paths. I was told that
we probably had no idea what each other looked like. I didn't have my red hair then either.
I didn't have my hair like this either. I was wearing a vodka and I had no beard. I was like clean shaven.
If you saw Indy, you wouldn't recognize him. Like
you wouldn't recognize me at all, man. Honestly,
we would have been in the same building as well, because you.
I think we were in the same building because I was in the geography building and the history building wasn't really a history building. It was mixed. You were just spread around everywhere.
It was like arts building, wasn't it? Yeah,
he was in the Bhangra team. Did you see? He was very famous in the Bhangra team.
Oh really? Yeah, I can't believe we.
Shut up, man. No. God, I swear to God.
I was that geeky kid in the library all the time though, so maybe that's why. I'm a full history geek.
Were you there first thing in the morning and you got like the best table with a plug in the booth at like 7 a.m. and you used the Wi-Fi from 7 till 9 because the Wi-Fi was good, and then come 9 o'clock the Wi-Fi would die because everyone was on.
Everyone
all the nuances, right?
I would know to get there early. Yeah,
there you go. See,
and that's why I did very well. I was that nerdy kid. I've always been the nerdy kid in the library. Yeah.
So you did history, and with that, you're now a teacher. But one thing I did notice was you obviously sent us a bio of everything you've done, and one thing I noticed was you did a poem outside Kensington Palace, so Partition 47. And I was thinking, okay, did you learn about the things like the partition outside of just home in university or in schools or anything? How did you acquire that knowledge? Because when I learned that, it was very late on. It was in university. It was through a Sikh studies course. It was a little bit of my degree, but that opened a door to a bigger thing that I learned about.
So learning about partition, learning about our own history, that was definitely something that happened at home, because my dad has always loved history as well, and we would have books lying all around the house, and as soon as I could read, I would be picking up some of these history books, and Dad would have books from all around the world, so Asian history, African history, and that's where I'd say my passion and my love for reading and history and literature first started. And then I remember then going to school and obviously still quite passionate about history and deciding to choose it for GCSEs and then A-levels and then at uni. But then learning a curriculum that was the complete opposite, and it was very white, male, Eurocentric, and it still is till this day. And I really felt that kind of unbalanced feeling of like, I know there's still so much more history out there for me to learn, but it's not happening in schools. It's not happening in the academic space. And there was actually only one module at uni, and it was called Narratives of the Raj. And I remember when I saw it on the module list, and it was like, what? There's colonial history to pick, and I was like, yes, and picked it, and it was one of my favorite units. But yeah, that was about it, and everything else was still very white, male, Eurocentric. And then post that, it was me doing a lot of that self-education. So outside of the academic space and outside of the education space, I was doing all this learning myself, reading, researching, doing everything I could myself. But yeah, it wasn't happening within schools, and it wasn't happening within uni. And then when I then became a history teacher, to then see that this curriculum is still the same was so exhausting, because it's like the curriculum that we've got today is still the curriculum that was made back in the 70s, so under the Thatcher government. So it's just insane. But the whole curriculum conversation is really complex, because about 60 to 70% of schools in the UK now are academies, and academies actually don't have to abide by our national curriculum. They can actually...
What is an academy? Like, what's that transition? Why do they do it?
So the academization, that's a whole different...
Academization, that's a word. Word of the day, folks. Yeah, go on.
That whole process is... The easiest way that I can summarize it is like schools turning into little businesses.
Yep.
Right.
So rather than being kind of state controlled schools, so a normal state school or a state comprehensive, which is kind of what I grew up in, you would have state comprehensives, you would have grammar schools, and then you would have independent private schools. You then now have these academies, which are owned by like a trust. So one trust would own lots of different schools. So yeah, they're kind of like mini businesses, and they actually have more sway on how things are taught. So they don't actually have to strictly abide by the national curriculum, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But yeah. At the end of the day, what we do need to see is I would personally want to see a curriculum that is more inclusive, that is more diverse. And when I was teaching history, it would be a lot of my own time and effort to bring in all these extra resources, and I'd bring in extra stuff into lessons and add things to my lesson plans to make them more inclusive and fun and diverse, and to show the kids in my class that yes, history can be relatable for them too, and it isn't just this one picture that they've been shown their whole lives. Yeah, Henry VIII. Oh my God.
It's all about bloody Henry, isn't it? I mean, this is just from a like an interest question. So you're teaching in a school, and obviously, you know, the kids have exams, so obviously certain things have to be taught. My time GCSE was all Hitler was the thing we studied for GCSE, all the papers.
Still is.
Loved it. Like I still a period of history. To this day, if there's anything that comes on Netflix about Hitler or Stalin,
you'll watch it.
I'm gonna. I love history, so for me,
Stalin definitely. I'm a big fan of the Cold War, but not
good thing you said big fan of the. Okay, I'm glad you clarified that. Because someone clips that, you're finished. You're fired tomorrow morning. I'm a big fan of Stalin. Me, what? Right.
There's a great animated. I think it's a 5-6 part series on Netflix called "How to Become a Tyrant" or "Playbook of a Tyrant."
I haven't watched it yet.
It's really good. Me and my wife, we watch it. We're watching like every night. We just because it's the way they've. You know, they portray these guys. They've obviously done bad things. Yeah. But how? You know, there's always this analogy I give. Are you a Harry Potter fan?
Yes, I'm a big Harry Potter
fan. So in the first one, when Ollivander's talking to Harry, and he's like, you know, Voldemort did very bad things, you know. But he says, you know, he's done really bad things, but they were, you know, magnificent things. And I give that kind of analogy when I'm talking about certain tyrants, where it's like, okay, yeah, hands down, these guys did really bad things. But the ability to do these things, to be like, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And they actually went and did it. And that's what this series kind of looks at. It looks at, well, how did they actually construct these things? And it's really interesting. Anyway, my question was, so when you say more inclusive curriculum, like, what do you actually mean? Like, what gives one or two examples of what would you actually teach in school, like, that's outside of the kind of current stuff?
Okay, so I'll give one example of, so when we're teaching empire, which is in the curriculum, there is a section in year 9 where they learn about empire.
Empire being?
The British Empire.
The British Empire, right.
Or looking at empires in general, because it's not just the British Empire, there's multitudes of different empires throughout history. But let's just talk about the British Empire specifically. The way that it was taught for a very long time was almost like celebratory.
Yeah.
This was the British Empire. This is the amount of the world that they owned. This is what they did and went into other countries and made them more civilized and governed them in this way. And for a long time, that's how it was conveyed. There was nothing about the atrocities of empire or the millions of people that were killed or displaced or what impact empire then had on those countries. So that's just one place where we could say, okay, this is what the British Empire was. This is what they did. Fine. It's not a story about good and bad. I'm not saying it needs to be that story of good and evil, but it needs to show a more realistic,
balanced,
more nuanced understanding of what that period was and the impact that it had. So that's just one example of what they could do differently. But
in school as well, with the Hitler thing, they always say, oh, Britain was amazing. We saved the Second World War and all that shit. The French did nothing. And I'm like,
go to French schools and see how they're teaching it, because it's very different.
And I'm like, or go to Germany and see how they teach it. And they own the fact that Hitler was a massive genocidal person, and they own it. And they're like, this is what happened. This is how we recovered afterwards, and this is where we are today. But there's nothing like that in British. Yeah, and there's nothing like that.
We're in denial. The British history is in complete denial about all the atrocities that they were involved in, and if anything, just don't want to admit it, because
and there's loads.
They get on, for some reason. There's this big complex here about the apologies that are required, or feeling guilty about stuff that happened. We're not asking for too much of that. All we're asking for is a recognition that it did happen, and not to just completely just try and blanket over it. But yeah, that's one example. Another example is of teaching the Vietnam War, which is another period of history that I love. And the way that it's taught is it's called the Vietnam War, and it looks at America's role in what they went and did and how they got involved in the Vietnam War. It shows very little from the Vietnamese perspective. If you go to Vietnam, when I was in Vietnam a couple of years ago,
they tell a different side of the world.
The complete opposite.
They say it's the American War. They say Americans came here, and this is what this is what happened. And obviously it's a very complex issue of communism and what was going on in Vietnam, and there's lots of other players involved, but it was also a proxy war of communism and capitalism going on at the time. But yeah, that's just another example of where it's being taught from just one lens and one perspective, and we need to be seeing these different perspectives in history and pulling in all these other sources and viewpoints and voices to say, okay, this is what a fuller picture actually looks like.
Objective truth.
Well, I guess truth is really, I don't use that word when we talk about history, because is there ever truth in history? But what there is understanding different perspectives, and I think that's just something our curriculum just doesn't do enough.
Did you get into being a teacher because you wanted to make those changes, or because you just enjoyed the subject and you want to teach others about it?
I became a teacher, and I still am a teacher and an educator, because I wanted to educate and inspire and empower young people, and that's why I became a teacher, because I do love history, and I wanted to teach history, but also taught sociology. I also taught politics. I also taught a bit of philosophy for a little while. When you become a teacher in a secondary school, you end up teaching everything. They're like, you can teach this, get you over there, you can teach that. You teach PE. There you go, you're teaching everything, just because there's so many cuts in education that this is what happens. But I became a teacher because I wanted to change young people's lives, and I thought it was really important for them to see someone like me in the classroom too, especially teaching a subject like history, because I do not look like your typical history teacher, obviously. No. So for them to see someone that looked like them and sounded like them and was similar to them was something I was really passionate about. And I had a teacher who completely changed my life growing up, because as I mentioned before, I was a kid that was suffering from anxiety, suffering from depression. I was that really shy, introverted kid that would be terrified to put their hand up in class, and went through a really rough patch at school. And there was one teacher, her name was Miss McCarthy. She was my sociology teacher, and she really did change my life. And I remember there was one time after a lesson, she sat me down, and she could tell I was struggling with a lot, and she could just see it. And she was the only one of the only people that saw that. And you know, that whole thing of when you feel seen or when you feel heard, and how much of a difference that can make for your life. That was the one teacher that did that, and she showed me how much potential I had. And I knew I was bright, but I wasn't pushing myself enough. And she was definitely the teacher that was like, Jaspreet, you're made for big things, and you deserve to fulfill that. And it was because of that one teacher that I actually then started to unpack a lot of the things that I was going through, and also started working much harder in school, and then ended up doing really well in school as well. Straight A's and A stars.
Hey.
Just saying. But it was really that boost in confidence as well, in believing in myself, because then I then went on to like become head girl and all that sort of stuff in sixth form, and then just like looking back at that younger Jaspreet, that really shy, insecure, terrified little girl, to then who I am now. That was one of the people that did really change my life. So becoming a teacher and thinking that, okay, if I can do that for one other student or one kid, then that's my life made, really. And kind of looking at it from a Sikhi perspective as well, and thinking that we're each here to find what seva we can provide whilst I exist here. I feel that the seva that I can provide can be through teaching, and that can be one way that I can help people, as well as the poetry and writing. So it does connect to my journey and my path in terms of Sikhi as well, that being a teacher feels like my seva as well.
And when you went to do gender studies, how was that received by the family, like how you said earlier?
And just premise that with what is gender studies?
What is gender studies?
What
Okay.
is gender studies?
Man, woman, done.
This
Degree.
was the question. Could you imagine when my baba, when I was telling my dadaji that, oh, I'm going to do a master's now, I finished my degree, I'm going to do a master's. He's, oh, that's great.
That's
What's
good.
the master's? And he
What's
knew,
there?
obviously he understood I was studying history, so he understood that much. And then when I was
He
like,
thought it couldn't get any lower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was like, so they settled for the fact
geography
that I wasn't,
geography.
yeah.
That's a yellow.
They settled for the fact that I wasn't going to be doctor, dentist, lawyer, accountant. So I think by that point they were like, okay, she wants to be a teacher. Okay, we understand that much. But then, I wanted to do gender studies, and explaining to my family what gender studies was a lot of fun. But to summarize it, the master's was a little bit of sociology, it's a little bit of social policy and politics and anthropology, but it's looking at the study of gender. So what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be female, male, and everything on that spectrum. Looking at stuff like sexuality, looking at stuff like masculinity, but all the interesting stuff behind that all as well. So we're looking at kind of historical perspectives, cultural perspectives, social perspectives, how it relates to faith, how it relates to identity, and then also a lot on social policy and politics as well, about how it involves in the political space too. So it was really interesting. And then I had to do a research thesis that year as well. And I decided to do my thesis on a really heavy topic, actually. It was on female infanticide in Punjab. So I was looking at why specifically in Punjab were there some of the highest rates of female infanticide, which is the killing of a baby girl.
This is weird. The reason why I'm saying this is because my dissertation was based on something similar. So mine was about sex selection in Indian communities, and is that a thing? As in, do parents want to have a boy or a girl, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And is that a thing, and do you think it's still a thing today? And I'm like, okay, it's weird how you just said that, and I was like, I did that. No one really knows that, but yeah, I did do that on a dissertation topic. Yeah,
because obviously in terms of geography and population changes,
so in geography as well, I had to do a module. I mean, I didn't want to do it, but the module was basically based on gender and all of that stuff.
I didn't want to do it. Did you hear?
I didn't want to do it. No. The reason why I didn't want to do it. The reason why I didn't want to do it is because I felt like when I was going into that lecture, I was getting beaten around the head for being a man. Honestly, like I'd sit there and I was like, "Fuck me, man! I'm sorry. What do you want me to do?"
I'm so
and I was
sorry you felt victimized for being.
I was one of like five guys, right? The rest of it was all women, and they're sitting there nodding it, lapping up what this lady's saying, and I'm like, "I'm getting beaten, man. This is shit." But in all fairness, I learned about like other parts of the world where, say in Guatemala, I think it is, where they have these small little banks and the women are in charge of the money, not the men, because the men are irresponsible. Yeah. I'm like, oh, didn't know that was a thing. So little things like that you tend to learn and pick up on.
Yeah, but, that cultural context is so valuable when you learn about the fact that many other cultures outside of the Western world, it is very different dynamics.
They have it split differently to what you think.
Yeah. And many families and many places across the world are actually female-led and are very maternal-led, and they hold those roles in families and in wider structures. Is actually only in the Western world that we actually have these dynamics of patriarchy. Even in South Asia, from parts of the world that we're from, women were in positions of power for a very, very long time. It was only when the British came that all changed. So it's actually the Western world that actually has more of an impact on some of those things. But anyway, that was what my thesis was on. And I did actually look at a lot from the kind of population perspective and the geography perspective of why specifically in Punjab was it happening so much? So female infanticide and also sex selective abortions, and then also the abandonment of baby girls as well. And I worked with quite a few charities in Punjab looking at this specific issue, but also looking at how it translates to here in the West as well. So why do we have this ongoing son preference that we still even still see till this day?
Yeah.
It's like as soon as anyone gets pregnant, it's like,
Yeah,
exactly. And we're still, that's still going on now. And what detrimental effect that can have on a number of different things, what effect that can have on girls, what effect that can have on boys, what effect that can have on our gender ratio in years to come. So yeah, that's what I ended up researching in that gender studies masters. And I remember later on that year when I was talking to my dadaji, who I used to call Babaji, about what my thesis was on, he actually told me a few first-hand stories of people in his friend that had actually killed baby girls.
There we go. Yep.
So yeah, those stories.
Yeah.
It's
deep. It's deep. I'm fine. But yeah, it's massively tough. And what was your outcome of yours? Because mine was sort of inconclusive, but did you have like a set theme that came out of it?
I guess kind of the outcome of that research was, okay, what can we do next? How can we stop this from happening? How can we reduce this from happening? That was kind of what I wanted to get out of the thesis. So actually looking at, okay, the statistics and collating all those stories, but then also saying, okay, what do we do next? And there was a number of different things to look at. That's kind of like education in those particular areas, supporting those girls that have been abandoned, political changes that can be made. So kind of macro perspectives and then micro perspectives of some of the changes that can be made from the top down and bottom up. So that's kind of where I left that thesis and where it finished off. But after I'd finished writing it, I was like, okay, how do I get this message out? And how do I share this with as many people as possible? Because I was so passionate about it that I wanted to share that message with more people. And I recognize that not everyone's got the time to read a 20,000 word paper. So it's not like I can go around giving this thesis to everybody. Yeah. So I was like, what could I do? What can I do to get this message out there? And for many years, by this point, I'd been writing poetry. And like I was mentioning before, I was using poetry as an outlet for a lot of the stuff I was going through as a teenager. So I'd been writing since I was 13. So I was like, okay, how about I summarize this thesis into a short poem? Because people have time to read a short poem or to listen to a 1 minute poem. And it was a poem called Queens and Corpses. And I remember I heard about this arts and poetry night that was happening over in West London. I'm from East London. And I heard about this. Yeah, I was like, all the way in Hounslow, there was this arts and poetry night going on. It was called Saffron Mic. And shout out to everybody that was at Saffron Mic that night. And that was actually the first show that I ever performed at. And that was about 5-6 years ago now. And that was the first poem I ever performed in front of an audience as well. And it was about that topic. And that poem, someone was filming it in the audience, went viral the next morning. And I woke up with messages from people all around the world, UK, North America, Australia, Canada, India, saying they were really moved by that poem and really related to the topic of that poem and this issue of son preference, and why is it still happening. And that's actually where my journey is behind the Netra began. And that's when I kept performing, because I was like, okay, poetry can be really powerful in getting people to listen to certain messages, and it can be a really accessible way to talk about difficult topics or taboo topics, whether it's female infanticide and gender inequality, whether it's mental health stigma, whether it's stuff to do with race and identity, whether it's stuff to do with history. Poetry can be a really powerful form of getting some of these messages across, and a really accessible way to do that. Because I think what's special about spoken word, which is the art form that I do, and rather than just kind of traditional poetry, which is written, spoken word poetry has the intention to be heard.
Yeah.
So when you're writing it, even when I'm writing the poems, I'm imagining what they're going to sound like and where I want to
how it
pause
flows.
and the tone and it's derived from rap music. So it's very similar to the hip hop scene. That spoken word poetry originated as political poetry. So for communities that were marginalized or muted or ignored, spoken word poetry was the way to voice their stories and to voice the things that they needed to share. So that's why I find it so powerful, and that's why I love it so much. But yeah, that's actually where my poetry journey started as well, at the same time as when I was doing my master's.
And I think that's a good place to have a full circle moment from what the conversation of how to enunciate your YouTube channel and name to how it all finished. I think that's a good place. But Jaspreet, before we finish, I do have to ask you some quick fire questions.
Yes.
So the rule is you have to tell me the first answer that comes to your mind.
Oh God.
Any long pauses, you will be penalised. No, I'm joking. There's no nothing's gonna happen.
I don't know how he does you.
Just be honest here. Just be honest. Okay. All right.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay. What's your favourite food?
Roti.
Be more specific. What in roti?
Actually,
Right. Okay. I'll do one
one or
better.
the other.
Tell me your death row meal.
my death row meal would probably be roti, saag, and dahi.
There you go. That's it.
Boom.
Makki di roti,
Alright.
normal roti.
Makki di roti now. I'm going to have to
There you
change.
go.
Sorry, see,
With
I'm not good at
saag,
this.
With saag, there you go. It has to go. I get that. I understand that. What's the name of the temple that we pray at?
Gurdwara. But it's
See
not
how
a
she says it,
temple.
Karan. See how she says it.
No.
But I'm also going to correct that is technically not a temple.
I know it is. But the reason why I say it in that way is to stop people from being like how do you say Gurdwara? People are like Gurdwara, but I'm like I have to get you to say it.
Oh, the whole
Yeah.
Gurdwara. Okay,
Exactly.
Yeah, okay,
there
right,
you go.
yeah,
There you
okay.
go. That's
Yeah,
why I
yeah.
said it in that way. I know it's not, but yeah.
Yeah.
Humble the poet or Rupi Kaur?
Rupi Kaur.
Okay. Biggest idol growing up?
My dad.
Very good answer. You'll be getting some hugs the next time you see him. Watch. What's the one thing you would change about the school curriculum?
Making it more inclusive.
What's the one thing you wish you could tell your younger self?
Be brave.
And what's your nickname at home?
Oh God. Do I have to say this out loud?
Yeah. Let's go, man. Let's go.
Let's guess first, Indy. One guess for you, Indy. One guess for me. Good.
You're going to
Jesse.
both guess?
We're gonna guess. We'll guess first.
Okay, go
Indy,
on. Give me a
I
guess.
said Jesse.
Okay, I would say Jesse. So, is it actually to do with your name? That's the first thing. Was it like a complete random one?
Is it like Laddu or something? Like what?
If it's like a happy random.
Yeah,
you get random
in which
nicknames
case you're not
on
gonna
your
get
name.
it.
We're not gonna get it.
You know what? I don't have one nickname. There's multiple nicknames that
Go
my
on,
family have
read
for
them
me
off.
because I am
I'm waiting,
Sorry.
man.
Ek, do, tin.
Well, I'll tell you the one that I
Function.
hate. I'll tell you the one that I hate the most because I'm
Prito.
just gonna let you. Yes.
Prito.
Oh my God.
Yes. Oh yes.
It's see, it's such the connotation of that word. I don't know,
like
man.
it.
You think of just like some old auntie eating laddus at the Gurdwara, like Prito auntie.
Prito auntie.
No, you know that's it. Like you'll know the kids will be talking to other kids. They'll be like, you'll know it's Prito auntie because she's got red bal.
She's
Lal
got
bal.
Lal Barbie.
Lal
They're gonna be
bal
like,
lady. Yeah.
Lal Barbie, yeah. Yeah, that's the one that I hate, and
Okay.
my brothers know I hate it as well, so they'll say it on purpose. But yeah. I've
Oh,
got I'm
Prito.
the youngest of 4 siblings, so you
Four.
can imagine how much I get picked on. So
Yeah, definitely.
Indy's the same.
I'm the same.
Oh,
I understand it. Youngest of three.
His
it's fine.
wedding reception recently. So his name's Indy, and so
He's
it's
got
just
the same name as my husband. I've not heard many
Oh,
Indies
wow.
that are
Too
also
many-
Indian.
I need to meet this guy, man, because too many parallels between me and him have emerged.
He's
in
there.
this
He's there.
conversation.
Look, he's right
And
there.
by
Put
the
him on
way-
camera.
He did
Put him
come
on the
in,
camera.
now he's ran away.
By the
I
way,
was
last
I
question.
always
Do you know how you also said that the story is based on your husband's journey? Yeah.
Yeah.
In the series,
Yeah.
the kid said he got the number off a goodie called Holly. Did your husband get the number off a goodie called Holly?
He ain't chatting to no Harleen. No, I'm
All right.
kidding. No, I'm
Harleen,
No,
Harleen.
that bit, I'll tell you why I put that bit in. And some people are like, oh, why did you put that bit in? Da, 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 da. I
No,
put
it's
that
real.
bit- No, it's real. And I wanted young Sings to feel like, you know what? they can get a girl's number too.
And the thing is, we are British Sikh, and I think this is something that we don't. Part of identity, yes, is that we're Sikh, but we're British as well, and that I think was beautiful about what you said.
Yeah,
it's marrying the two. It's not like we're not Singhs from India. That's a different experience.
And it's something realistically teenagers go through. They are gonna be chatting to whoever and want to get so and so's number. So it's a true depiction. So yeah.
There you go. And lastly, your book recommendations. If you want to tell us now, you can tell us now, or you can tell us after, and we'll drop it in the little caption of the.
Oh yeah, let me have a think about them, and I'm going to give you a couple that you can suggest.
Do you want to tell people how they can find you?
So everyone can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all those good places at Behind the Netra.
And when's your book coming out?
So Brown Girl Like Me is coming out next February, so the 17th of Feb 2022, but it is available to pre-order already. So. And
where can you pre-order it?
At all good bookshops. So Waterstones, W.H. Smith's, Amazon, you can find it. You can find it everywhere. So yeah.
There we go.
It's a polished
that, my friends, is how you plug something. Okay.
All good bookstores, right?
All good bookstores. You're like, whoa. Amazon? Damn, right?
He's going to get it, isn't he?
Oh man, but thank you, Jaspreet.
You just froze in the funniest position.
Yeah,
you literally froze like this.
Anyway, thank you, Jaspreet, aka Prito.
Oh no! I should not have told you guys that. I'm gonna regret that.
On an actual level, I need to meet your husband just to see how his name is in the video.
Get him on camera.
Get him on next.
No! I'll happily pop up him on the podcast next. Karan, we'll sort it out. We'll bring him on next.
Yes.
I'll be happy to.
Sing love,
I've dropped it in now.
Yes.
Sing love, man, bromance. Let's go. In the beat, Indy versus Indy.
Judah crew. Yeah.
But thank you guys if you made it this far. Thank you for listening this week. And drop us a comment. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And we'll see you next week. Cheers, guys.